did transition pictures for Swiss psychiatrist and mystic Carl Jung. He died not of a heart attack. He actually had a heart attack in the 1950s, but then gradually his body wore out and he died in 1961, on my birthday, as it happens. But he was the guy who brought us synchronicity, the idea of synchronicity, and introvert and extrovert personalities. He probed the idea of a collective unconscious, something which takes the heritage that we have as human beings and brings it from, I guess, past lives, cumulatively from past lives into the present, and we all tap into it with our individual unconscious. I believe that was his idea. He thought that it was better to dig into the unconscious and bring our shadow selves into our consciousness so that we could face it and deal with it. I don't know if he was a religious man, but he certainly studied Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism and stuff, the better to understand the subject. Interestingly, he was supposed to meet with Ramana Maharshi, whose pictures I did a while back, and didn't because he saw him as being too much into the self. He was too much into himself, which is exactly what the pictures said about him when I did his transition, which is very, very interesting. But I really had no expectations of Carl Jung at all, not knowing very much about him. And when I went into the energy, he was in that metaphorical space. I always see that kind of chamber, which is just representative of the feeling that people have when they cross over. He was in that space, but he was like a pendulum. He was swinging backwards and forwards very slowly. And with each swing, he sank a little bit further down until he was standing in this metaphorical chamber. So I guess it was a slow, gradual demise for him, rather than a snap kind of he's here and then he's gone. There was nothing in any way rushed about this. He wasn't fazed by it. He was simply interested in what was happening. So much so that when he was free of the swinging, he went over and he touched the wall, like people used to do in those old Journey to the Center of the Earth kind of movies, where they show up in an environment and they go, oh, what is this over here? It's so fascinating. He felt completely integrated immediately into this environment, as if to say, oh, finally, I get to find out what this is really about. Thank goodness. I've always wanted to know. It was so matter of fact, and there was no mystique, there was no wonder. It was just, oh, okay, here we are. I wonder what this is. I wonder what that is. This is really fascinating. There was nothing to it. He was very interested in the textural aspects of the process and was in his mind analysing it the way, for example, medical students might dissect an organ or a frog or something. It was like, what is this and where does that lead and how does this go? He had a sort of, this is what I expected feel to him. Like, oh yeah, okay. It's not exactly what I thought, but it'll do. It's all right. But there was no deep emotional component to this transition. In fact, it didn't really feel like he was experiencing his own transition the way most other people have done. It felt like he was seeing it as a generic event, checking boxes. Aha, that's what this is, and that's what that is, and that's why I'm here. He wasn't feeling anything. He was mentally processing it, which makes him very, very different to most other people. He was so calm. He was so contained. He was so intellectual about it and wouldn't allow his feelings to get in the way. Equally, there was no joy here. I mean, he married in his life, he had children. There's no earthly reason why a man like that shouldn't experience joy. But there was no sense of emotional depth here. Everything was a calculation. Everything was an evaluation. Everything was a series of checkboxes that he went through. Okay, got it, right. And we go up here? Okay, yes, that would fit in. He was drawing on his mortal experiences, his mortal knowledge, and imposing that template over his own transition as he went through it. That's what made these pictures particularly interesting. But I wanted to feel something, and I couldn't feel anything at all. He didn't seem to identify with that side of things. Before he dared venture up this symbolic tunnel that I always see that leads to the light, before he did that, he turned around and he took one last look at this chamber, as if this chamber represented the culmination of everything he'd learned, everything he'd experienced, everything he expected, everything he'd assumed. This chamber represented that. And he looked at it the way people look at their home when they're about to move out. You know, on moving day, when the house is empty, the furniture's gone, you're about to hand in the keys, this is it, this is the end, and you take one last nostalgic look around the house and remember all the stuff that's happened in that house. It felt like that. Or somebody climbing a gangplank onto an ocean liner before leaving their country for good. It had that sort of nostalgic, reminiscent finality to it. Everything had been laid to rest, including himself, his mortal self, and he was ready to go, ready to find out what came next. It was a big experiment to him. It was a big adventure in scientific observation, as you would almost expect from a man of his reputation and his experience. And he began walking up the tunnel, but with his head down in an academic, considered kind of way, as though he was pondering over some speech he was about to give, working on the last details of what he would say. It was very internalized as he went. And I thought, I'll take a look, if I can, through his consciousness at what he is perceiving here as he looks at this tunnel, as he looks at this space. And all I got when I did that was the same tunnel, the same space, but robbed of all colour, unnecessary detail. It was simply the structure of the tunnel, just white. There was no complication to it. There wasn't even real architecture to it. It was simply a channel along which he went. It was plain, it was uncluttered, it was uninteresting, and that's how he approached the light. There was involvement, but not. Curiosity and intrigue, but not. A process he was going through, but not. It was quite contradictory. And the effort he put into climbing this tunnel in a pondering mood was like somebody climbing a long set of stairs. He would look up occasionally and go, "How far now? Oh, okay, all right, okay, we're getting there." And he would continue walking, still thinking, still pondering over the experience, still calculating, but all up here, nothing here. Now, of course, he has no body in the transition, but there was no sense of emotional engagement. Everything was here. When he arrived at the light, this was slightly different. He had not expected this. This was not a part of his calculation. And it was like, so I do what here exactly? What is this? He didn't quite get what I call a dome, but it's metaphorical, but he didn't quite get what the dome was, what he was supposed to do here. And once again, I went back into his consciousness to try and perceive what he was perceiving. And once again, everything was just structural. It was white and uninteresting, robbed of detail. Okay, so what do? Where do I go? I go in here, all right. Though, as I watched, he lifted off the ground, the metaphorical ground, he lifted off the ground and began floating towards the dome, but incrementally, really slowly, as if there was no resistance, but also no haste. It's like, I've done all I can do here. I understand what I understand. I know what I know. I've been through what I've been through. It's good. There's no need to fight this. This is just the process I'm going through. So much resignation. And at this point, he was almost done thinking as well. Done trying to work it out. Done calculating, expecting, and so he had left all that behind at the bottom of the tunnel. Now he was simply ready because there was no alternative. And he allowed the dome, the light, to just pull him in. He was done. He left everything on the quayside before he boarded the ship, and now he was sailing away. But everything had been intellectualized. I'm not quite sure at what point he would feel anything. Everything was to do with the brain and the process. There was no excitement, no joy, particularly no joy, right to the very end. And he went into the dome and floated away, and he was gone. Still with the wheels turning. In a way, this adds to the whole destiny point idea. That some people, the greats, may only have one true destiny point in life. They live it, they experience it, they bring something invaluable to the world, which in his case was major understanding of the unconscious. They bring something major to the world, and their job is done. Their destiny is fulfilled. There's nothing more for them to complete while they're here. They can just go. Whereas for the rest of us, we may have several destiny points where our presence in the world at this particular time contributes to the whole in some way. Not in a way that we necessarily planned, but in a way that's useful to the greater whole. The issue becomes when you have a single destiny point like he had, do you discard everything else? Because there are two ways of looking at life. There are the ones where you just go full at it. You drink, you take drugs, you travel, you risk everything all the time, simply to live, to experience the whole thing that the world has to offer. Then other people take it very calmly. They don't abuse their body. They don't risk too much danger because they don't want to hurt themselves. They live a tamer kind of existence. Jack London wrote, and this is a very popular quote these days, but Jack London wrote that the proper function of man, or woman, the proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. And the question becomes, are we really living? But it's not for us to judge how other people use their time. Carl Jung may have had joy in his mortal life, but it was very much missing during his transition. But we can't judge. Because that's his life. That's his soul's path. All we can do is take care of ourselves. Experience as much joy as we can. Move closer to wholeness as much as we can. And be as happy as we can. Carl Jung didn't know that level of joy and happiness and wholeness. But he was a great and influential man. He fulfilled his remit. And the universe welcomed him with unconditional love, the way it always does with everybody. And he would at some other point learn the value of joy and emotional engagement. But I guess some people sacrifice those things in order to achieve and to be great and significant and to help the world move forward in its understanding. It's not for us to judge. And that's what I learned from Carl Jung. Subscribe if you would. Like, share. Follow me on Twitter if you like, at Cash Peters. But I really appreciate you watching. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.